On August 10, 2018, it was revealed that both Chris Hemsworth and, worse yet, Captain Kirk himself, Chris Pine, had dropped out of Star Trek 4. As far as headlines associated with brands go, these are pretty bad ones. That is the last thing license holder Paramount needs right now, as any bad press may cause more investors to pull out, threatening future projects. But alas, headlines associated with Star Trek have not gotten any better. In this video, we will first look into why the negative press is particularly bad for Paramount and Star Trek 4, before going over the most recent negative press, namely CBS being sued for plagiarism over Star Trek Discovery, and we'll look at the most recent Me Too scandal, which involves a Star Trek actor. As we explored in our previous video covering the rise and fall of Star Trek's Kelvin timeline, Paramount are in deep financial trouble. After years of failed investments and extremely expensive misfires, for instance such as Monster Trucks, the Ben-Hur remake, Suburbicon, Ghost in the Shell, and Star Trek Beyond, to name but a few, Paramount have accrued a debt of more than $10 billion that they will admit to, although some estimate it is actually closer to $15 billion. In any event, the various investment companies that have funded Paramount for the last few years, most of which are Chinese, have lost big on doing so. That, coupled with a recent change in Chinese financial legislation, means that Paramount's access to Chinese funding has been closed off. This means that they have to attract funding partners from elsewhere, which is easier said than done, given Paramount's recent track record of big losses. More investors will shun investment objects with Paramount's track record. But some investors, most notably those who are seeking to diversify their portfolio with something unusual, and who are willing to give Paramount's new management and strategy a shot, may be willing to invest some capital. But even if they won't invest much, however, they will be following Paramount's progress and the public excitement and perception over their announced projects very carefully, before actually committing the full amount needed to take a movie from early development to actual production. This is why it is in the interest of Paramount, as well as their Star Trek production arm Bad Robot, that the news coverage of their movies is positive, because the investors funding it may pull out if it isn't, and they can do that. When movies are funded by external investment partners, they will promise a given amount of funds in advance, but under the proviso that certain conditions are met, such as the total cost not exceeding a specified amount, that the production has to begin by a given date, or the involvement of specified named talent in front and behind the camera, among many other things. Only when these conditions are met to the investor's satisfaction will they commit the promised funds. Then the movie in question can get the green light and proceed through production. The list of movies that have been announced but without ever seeing the light of day is a long one, not just at Paramount, but in Hollywood in general. Whenever this happens, lack of funding is more often than not the reason why. In the case of Star Trek 4, there is still time to withdraw previously allocated funding. News headlines like Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth dropping out, and the following plunge in public perception and excitement because of it, are very good reasons for any investor to pull out. And we have incidentally heard rumors that is indeed what has happened. But as if Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth dropping out wasn't bad enough, there may be legal trouble looming over the horizon. In our previous video covering the controversies behind the production of Star Trek Discovery and the Picard spin-off series, we covered how Star Trek Discovery has been accused of plagiarism. To recap, a plot device in Star Trek Discovery is that they travel the universe on a mycelial network using a giant tardigrade as navigator. While this has some surface similarities with the navigators from Frank Herbert's Dune novels, the resemblance of this plot device to the indie point-and-click adventure game Tardigrades is an uncanny one. In this game, which was released in 2014, we follow a civilization which is on the verge of intergalactic travel using giant tardigrades to travel anywhere in the universe. The main character, Carter, looking much like Stamets, is a botanist that over the course of the game will discover the connection between the tardigrades and instantaneous space travel. Beyond the plot device similarities and visual similarities in the color palette, the game also features an interracial homosexual couple not wholly unlike Stamets and Dr. Colbert of Star Trek Discovery fame, as well as a character that has, at the very least, a passing resemblance to Michael Burnham of Star Trek Discovery. On August 21st of 2018, the game's developer, Anas Abdeen, announced on Twitter that he was officially going to court against CBS over Star Trek Discovery. He elaborated further on his blog, saying, The last 10 months were so hard on me in the development of the project. I tried every possible way to have a respectful and reasonable discussion with CBS, but they treated me in disrespect and just dangled me around with postponing meetings due to their vacations and being busy. The first conversation turned into the last one. I gave them a lot of time to make things right. Unfortunately, I found myself at a dead end with them, and I had to enforce my rights by filing a lawsuit to treat me seriously. Since then, Anas has agreed to a written interview with our good friend Overlord DVD. When asked about when he decided to go forward with his claim, he stated that, "I was interviewed last year by John Walker of Rock Paper Shotgun. A few days after the interview was published, I received an email from the vice president of CBS Law asking to talk to me in a phone call. I directed them to my lawyers. They kept postponing meetings and calls until finally we managed to make a Skype conference call. It was a very short call with no intention to negotiate. They only gave an offer and that's it. They offered to get rid of the tardigrade and not use it anymore on the show. And they also promised not to sue me for plagiarism. There was supposed to be another call/meeting, but they didn't make it." While Paramount are technically not part of the case, the Star Trek brand is. Meaning the case, if it indeed does go to court, will rub off on Paramount and any upcoming Star Trek movie they put out as well. Just as the Axanar lawsuit did when Star Trek Beyond was gearing up for release. Even if the matter is so far relatively unknown outside of fan circles, it is a situation the investors behind Paramount will follow very closely and will not be happy about. CBS, at the time of making this video, has not made any kind of public comment. They are, however, gearing up their legal team as is customary when faced with a lawsuit. If worse comes to worst, and the case does escalate further, one possible rumored defense strategy is to blame the original showrunner Brian Fuller, as the belief within CBS is that they can prove that the tardigrade, Spore Drive, and the Stamets character came into Star Trek Discovery through his original scripts. But again, this is just one rumored defense strategy. On August 25th, in a series of tweets, Robert Meyer Burnett stated, "The tardigrade character in Fuller's original conception of Disco was very different from what appeared on screen. Actually, a crew member named Ephraim, he worked in engineering. Clearly, after Fuller's departure, someone did indeed see this game, and was obviously, quote-unquote, inspired. In the original conception of Disco, the whole idea of the spores was all about terraforming. There was no spore drive. Clearly, that was a result of reworking what Fuller had done. It was clearly a cross between the tardigrade game and the Guild Navigators from Dune." In response to the question in a follow-up tweet, "But from what I understand, a certain personage at a certain corporate entity is blaming this clusterfuck on Brian. I hope to hell Brian saved everything and has a good attorney." Burnett said, "Oh, he did, and let me just say, he absolutely did not rip off the tardigrade game. Again, his version of the tardigrade was a Discovery crew member named Ephraim who worked with Stamets in engineering. Clearly inspired by Chewbacca, if anything." Burnett is known to be very close to the world of Star Trek, so it's not completely outside the realm of possibility that he would have detailed knowledge of Fuller's original plans for Star Trek Discovery. Meaning, the case just got a lot more interesting. We will keep you up to date on this situation as it develops, but in addition to possible plagiarism allegations, an actor associated with Star Trek has become embroiled with the Me Too movement again. Star Trek has, by a way of association, been involved with the Me Too movement before. As you may recall from the news, Kevin Spacey was fired from the hit Netflix series House of Cards, as well as replaced by Christopher Plummer in the Ridley Scott-directed All the Money in the World, after he was accused of behavior ranging from giving unwanted sexual attention to full-out sexual assault on numerous young men, both in the US and in the UK. While many victims have since come forward, his first accuser in the modern Me Too era, the one that set the dominoes falling, was Anthony Rapp, who plays Stamets of Star Trek Discovery fame. On October 29th of 2017, Rapp alleged that Spacey, while appearing intoxicated, made a sexual advance toward him in 1986, when Rapp was 14 and Spacey was 26. Rapp also told the story of the alleged assault in a 2001 interview with The Advocate, but Spacey's name was redacted from the publication to avoid legal disputes and public outing. Spacey stated through Twitter that he did not remember the encounter, but that he owed Rapp, quote, "the sincerest apology for what would have been deeply inappropriate drunken behavior," end quote, if he had behaved as asserted. Anthony Rapp would not be the last male victim associated with Star Trek to make waves with the Me Too movement. On August 19th of 2018, the New York Times broke the scoop that Asia Argento, actress, writer, and director, daughter of the filmmaker Dario Argento, and one of the leaders of the Me Too movement, had herself paid to silence a victim of her own sexual transgressions. Jimmy Bennett. In November of 2008, audiences were treated to the second trailer for J.J. Abrams' then upcoming Star Trek reboot. The first trailer which showed actual footage from the movie. The trailer began with a 1965 Stingray Corvette intentionally being driven over a cliff. The driver was just a kid the audience would learn was the young James Tiberius Kirk, played by actor Jimmy Bennett. Jimmy Bennett first met A.C. Argento when he was just 7, during the filming of The Heart is Deceitful Above All Things, a film which was directed by and starred A.C. Argento herself. She played the mother of Bennett's character, and according to him, they would have intermittent contact ever since, and a relationship Bennett saw as a mother-son relationship. In 2013, that relationship took an Oedipal twist, when they engaged in sexual relations. According to Bennett, Argento served him alcohol and forced herself onto him. At the time, she was 37, while he had turned 17 2 months earlier. This happened in the state of California, where the age of consent is 18, meaning she would be legally charged with statutory rape. According to the New York Times, Bennett had made an accumulated $2.7 million before the encounter, but he was so traumatized by the event that his creativity and output took a hit, and his income dropped to $60,000 a year afterwards. To this end, he sought financial compensation to avoid negative publicity. Argento's then-boyfriend, Anthony Bourdain, paid Bennett for his silence. But Argento herself would come out as a victim of sexual assault and spoke out against Harvey Weinstein, and this triggered Bennett. In a statement, Bennett would clarify that, "I did not initially speak out about my story because I chose to handle it in private with the person who wronged me. My trauma resurfaced as she came out as a victim herself." Like many powerful men accused of sexual misconduct before her, Argento would initially deny the allegations and accuse Bennett of being a failed artist who was only after money. However, on August 22nd of 2018, TMZ published a picture of the two in bed. They also published a text conversation between Argento and a friend of hers, where she admitted having relations with Bennett, although she claimed it was him that came onto her after desiring her for years. No one outside of those involved knows for sure where the truth lies. In the bigger scheme of things, and under normal circumstances, none of these news items should be much of a worry to the Star Trek brand or its owners and licensees. Most big intellectual properties are frequently involved in one legal matter or another without the public ever knowing or even caring. Furthermore, CBS is not yet convicted of plagiarism, and while the Star Trek name is always mentioned in conjunction with Bennett, few can tell you which role he played without searching Google first. And no one well-known associated with Star Trek are so far accused of any kind of sexual misconduct themselves. But as we've seen, for Paramount, these are not normal circumstances. We must remember they have lost their access to Chinese funding and have a horrible track record in actually providing a return on investment. As such, the investors they do manage to attract will be very wary of any more negative news, especially considering that both Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth have already dropped out of Star Trek. Against this backdrop, news items like these, which normally would have been trivial, become much bigger deals. Rather than these particular headlines, which merely occupy the present news cycle, if even that, is the worry from the investor's point of view, that these cases may expand and escalate to include the courts. That could mean long, drawn-out legal cases with pairings of Star Trek and plagiarism, and Star Trek and Me Too, albeit by proxy, in the same sentences. Prospects like that will make it ever more difficult for any investors that are still interested to keep wanting to fund Star Trek 4. Do you think any of this news will influence Star Trek 4 or Star Trek Discovery going forward? And if so, how? Let us know in the comments. If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel, Midnight's Edge After Dark, through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.